Well, we're back. We're back. Man, we're just burning through these talks. I hope you enjoyed that with Ash, Steph, Monica, and Adam. I hope that you enjoyed that. Today, right now, we're with Charlotte Pang from Sri Rashi Games, and the title of this is Protecting Your Pixel Art. Making games with empathy. That was a really good title. Protecting your little pixel heart. That was good.
Thank
Was
you.
that yours?
Yeah, I made up the idea of protecting your pixel heart. It's just something I wanted to visualize. Yeah.
Your little pixel heart. Yes. All right.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. We'll get your presentation up and take it away.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Indy. Fantastic. Are you able to see that? Oh, here we go. Presentation is here. Fantastic. So today we're going to be talking about protecting your pixel heart, making games with empathy. What does this talk about? It's a little bit about the games industry right now. A little bit of a rough space, to be honest. And in general, I'd extend this out to the creative industry not being the most stable and a little bit difficult for creatives to really thrive in. But today we're going to talk a little bit about some tools and processes that might help you get through working in the games industry, working on your creative projects, but also in general, just maybe share a little in the tough times that we've been having, and talk about what is within our control, what is not, and what we can do to help each other thrive. So, as a quick introduction, hello, I'm Charlotte, and I'm a producer at Chirashi Games, but I'm also a 2D animator and an artist. I'm working on multiple different projects at the same time, so it's a little hard to describe one of them sometimes. But in general, I also do a lot of traditional art. I'm finding a lot of joy in that recently with Christmas coming along and everything. I also am a Ring Fit adventurer. That is my go-to exercise at the moment. And another lovely factoid about myself is that I love to eat the exact same lunch every day. And we might touch again on that later in the presentation. So let's hop on in to the talk. Let's talk a little bit first about who this talk is aimed for. So I really planned this a lot for kind of indie developers, also if you're a solo developer, but in general, if you're kind of early in your career, generally interested in game dev, wanting to know what it's like, if you're just a game developer in general, I think this talk is perfect for you. If you're also a general creative, if you're just kind of making things creatively, you're a painter, artist, sketcher, I think this is also a fantastic talk geared for you. Specifically, if you're a producer, you might want to hear a little bit about some of the new perspectives or potential processes that I will talk about here. But in general, if you're just looking to work a bit more about how you communicate and talk with others, listening to your teammates and some of the tools you can put in your belt for that, I think this talk is for you. So let's hop on in to what is game dev with empathy. So I actually first learned about this concept when I first came into the games industry with a lovely organization called Code Coven, who helped me really get my foot on the ground and kind of get settled in working in games. And they've always kind of preached this concept of game dev with empathy. And I think for me, as I've kind of grown as a game developer, I think it's really about three specific things. I think it's one about prioritizing the people. So the people who make the games and all of our kind of very specific circumstances, all of our personal lives and all the things that will affect making a game. The second would be to making sure you're valuing the emotions of your teammates, taking into account different goals and values and listening to them and making sure that they are heard. And lastly, aiming for realistic goals. And I think setting goals is a lot more difficult than you realize. And as you go through making games or doing whatever creative projects, you might find that it's a little... things change quite easily. So making goals can be really difficult in a landscape that's constantly changing. So yeah, let's hop on into the very first section, which is about prioritizing people. So shout out to People Make Games because wow, people make games. So this is all about prioritizing people, is recognizing that people are very nuanced and multifaceted. People come from very different perspectives and different experiences. everyone's personal lives are very different, and recognizing that and kind of embracing that is a huge part of making games with empathy. I think especially I've learned a lot about kind of diversity and inclusion a lot recently, and I think a big part of that is making sure that we are embracing our differences and taking use of that and making sure that we can use these things to help us problem solve, find new narratives, new stories to tell, and all of it is so good to help us with it. Another point is that because we are people. Oh, sorry, I think I'm getting lots of notifications that you might. Another aspect of that would be to make sure that you recognize that not everyone is always operating at 100%, and that's completely okay. Everyone comes to game development with a lot of difficulties, maybe like personally. I think because it is such a creative thing to be doing, you're putting a lot of your personal life into it, and not being 100% is completely normal. So for me, I like to always expect a kind of more base level of around 70% or lower. So kind of recognizing that 100% is actually not a normal way to always be operating at, I think is also goes a long way for your teammates and also for yourself. And then lastly, it's always good to look at prioritizing your personal life, making sure you're taking care of your stability and recognizing your goals. So we'll hop more into prioritizing your stability. Excuse me. So in particular with, I think, indie games specifically, where I feel like a lot of game developers are working side jobs. You're probably doing like a lot of part-time work or even full-time work alongside your game development. Making sure that you are stable and that you are safe is extremely, extremely important. So if you're thinking of like, oh, I want to take this cafe job, I really want to, I want to find something that will help me stay financially afloat, that is completely okay. And I think that always should take the forefront of your priorities before game development. But additionally, it's great to also debunk and kind of deconstruct some of these thoughts around your paths into the games industry. For me, I feel like I have so many friends around me that have found really non-conventional ways into the games industry. I've heard of people who have found jobs from like working at museums, and then suddenly like the museum is like, oh, we need somebody to develop these games for the kids that come and visit, and they have found a new path to the games industry from just working in a museum. And I think I totally see that in so many different aspects and the ways people work. So I would totally like to debunk the shame that if you're like working somewhere that is like not super connected to the game industry right now, or you're looking at things that aren't connected, that's completely okay. And there are so many ways you will find yourself back to the industry that you want to be in. And the last point about there isn't any shame in finding other opportunities just to keep yourself afloat. Like I said earlier, if you need that cafe job, if you need something just to keep you afloat right now, I think that is absolutely okay. And that should definitely take priority over your creative things. Oh, next up, we're going to talk about setting expectations. So setting expectations can be really difficult, and I think it's always really healthy to talk about them as early as possible and then check in on them as you go. Some ways I have done setting expectations is through like these very technical terms like retrospectives and project health check-ins. But a lot of the time, I feel like expectation setting comes from talking to your teammates one-on-one. And when you do set those expectations, expect them to change. As you go through games industry stuff and as you go through your game development processes, as you work through creative things, expectations can shift. Maybe things are going incredibly well and you are like really excited about this project. So your goals might change. You might suddenly think, oh, actually, I would love this to be more than a portfolio piece. I want this to be a very successful project. And that's completely okay. It's important that someone feels comfortable vocalizing these things and talking about them and comfortable sharing them with the team. So the second part of setting expectations, I feel like, is making sure that everyone shares in how they are feeling, and you can try and find some common ground with that. So some common ground that you might need to set first would be like, what would the length of a project look like? That could really shift and change a lot depending on how the project goes. But if you set that at the beginning to say like, okay, I think a project is going to last about a year, and everyone is agreeing to, okay, we're going to commit our time for a year, it's really good to immediately have that ground set. Another one that crops up a lot that people may not always agree on is finding what success looks like for a project. And that can be really difficult, especially if you're like, this is more of a portfolio piece for me. This is not a portfolio piece. I want this to find viral success. It can look really different for everybody. And it can be difficult to find a medium for that, but at least knowing what each person's goals are is really, really helpful. And then number 3 is just to acknowledge that sometimes expectations can't be agreed upon, and that's completely okay. So that may be a good chance to revisit scope, take a look at the project as a whole. Maybe it's not quite fitting the team that you're working with, or the team doesn't fit the project as well. It's okay if those things happen, and it's good to definitely communicate that and talk about it. But it may also just be teammates need a bit of processing time, and they just need to think a little bit about what these goals are, what the project's goals look like, and what success means for them. All of these things are subject to change and maybe just needs a little bit of time. So setting expectations as a whole. So we're going to now move on into valuing emotions, moving smoothly on from expectations to emotions. So this section is a lot about listening carefully, how to listen to somebody, and making sure that you approach your teammates with understanding and respect, but also recognizing the goals and values of somebody, which can be really different to successes that they want from a project. So let's just hop in. We're going to talk a little bit more about checking in with your teammates. So some of the kind of formal check-in processes that I've used would be retrospectives, project health check-ins, and one-on-ones. My personal favorite would be retrospectives. I am a huge fan of kind of reviewing how things have gone. And retrospectives often have these like really visual exercises, like this sailboat exercise. What was the wind behind our sails? What was the sun beaming on us? What was warming our skin? I don't know, like it's just lots of very visual aids to go with retrospectives that I really enjoy. So I highly recommend employing one of these to make a formal check-in, especially if you're kind of feeling like something's not quite right or there's some miscommunication happening. Any of these check-ins can be so useful for realigning your team together. Next is informal check-ins, which are also possible, but just make sure that you're being mindful about professionalism and work boundaries. And I'd like class an informal check-in as playing games together, kind of watching a streaming of film, or just hanging out on Discord and chatting. excuse me. Yeah, I definitely use these also as a way to check in on the well-being of your team, but maybe an informal check-in is not so much about the business or like the game development, and it's just more about how are you feeling as a person? How is your life going? Like it can be more of a check-in as a friend, which is also really useful. Next up, we're going to take a little look at our values. So talking about core values, I would recognize as something that you are ingrained. This is a value that's ingrained in you. And I believe that core values usually will have built up from childhood in some way. So that for me, that can look like I really value accountability in teams. So, and I think that is a core value for me is because of a lot of like family reasons and like how I was raised and the circumstances that I was raised in. That's why I really value accountability and like making sure that everyone is communicating their circumstances as clearly as possible. But core values can look really different for everybody, and they don't have to be like large ideas like that. A core value could even be as small as like, I really love open workspaces, or like, I love a place that has co-working, that kind of stuff. If you have been in workplaces before that have these spaces and you really like them, that could be a core value for you. But most importantly, it's just about what makes you excited to work on this project, or what makes you excited in general to be creative, what kind of drives you as a game developer, as a creative person. Next up would be taking a look at general goals, like what do you want to do in the future? That could be in 2 years' time, maybe a little more short term, or in 5 years' time, maybe a little bit more long term. Recognizing the kind of trajectory of your teammates and yourself is super helpful in making sure that you're kind of accounting for all the different voices and all the different perspectives of people. So for me, like as a producer at Chirashi Games, I'm also a co-founder at Chirashi Games. So I would love for Chirashi to have their first commercial game released in the next year. In 5 years' time, I honestly don't know. But knowing that at least right now, I would like this commercial game to be released in a year's time, I think is a very achievable and doable goal that we can all work towards. And I believe we're all aligned with that as well in Chirashi. Next up is recognizing where you're at now. So kind of in relation to what you want in the future, how far along are you in achieving those goals? What additional steps can you make to continue heading in that direction? Are you heading in that direction? It's okay if you're not. Like, if you're like, I really want to be working in the games industry, but I'm currently, I'm currently doing this retail job. That is completely fine. Bringing those two together is not easy, but I think if you recognize that these are two separate things at the moment and they are not on the same trajectory, that is also really, really useful for finding out what you want your future to look like and what it might look like. Next up, we're going to chat a little bit about listening and communicating. This is something I have been working on a lot for a long time. Not going to lie, I feel like I struggle sometimes with communicating, especially with a lot of remote work. I think taking the essence of like what somebody is saying sometimes on Discord can be really difficult, or kind of interpreting a Slack message and reading it in your mind is really hard to judge what the tone is. So I have to say that take this with a grain of salt and take what you will, but I have worked on this a lot with some help from coaches and people who are my mentors, who have like really helped me understand how communication can work with different people. So a huge tip I have for, especially if you're communicating just through text, or like there's a lot of asynchronous communication going on. I absolutely recommend not responding immediately to messages and giving yourself just a little bit of buffer time. This has really helped me, especially with messages that are like a little triggering, or like they induce a little bit of anxiety in my heart. If I give myself just 5-10 minutes to have a think about what I'm going to say, what this message means, what my response is, I think it makes so much more of a better response. So making sure that I'm just taking my emotions out of it and making sure I'm not like also responding emotionally in some way can be so helpful. But definitely just giving yourself some grace and time to consider what your feelings actually are, what you want to say is so helpful. Number 2 is to make sure you understand what is being said, and if not, ask for some clarification. It's completely okay to ask. I think I really struggled with this, especially when I'm like in a new space, or if I've like joined a new job or something. Excuse me. It's so hard to find the questions to ask and then feeling comfortable to ask those questions. But what I've found as I've gone through a lot of game development stuff and like going through the games industry, that people are pretty friendly. And if you're really not sure what's being said, it is so much better just to ask than to kind of sit there and stew on it and try and unpick it. Like, there are so many different ways to interpret specific words. Like every game has a different definition for alpha, gold, and beta or whatever. Like everything has such a different definition, and it depends on each project. So asking for a little bit of clarification is no problem at all. And number 3, if you are having kind of like, I don't know, if you're communicating with somebody and they want you to take some action on something, it's absolutely great to let them know of the plan that you're going to take. Do that plan. If there's like a deadline, you can say, oh, I'm going to be doing this next week. Do it next week. And then make sure you check in and see how it's going and review on it. So you're like being proactive, letting them know what you're planning on doing, and actually actioning that as well. So that's a huge part of listening and communicating, or just some things I guess I have learned from listening and communicating. Next up, we're talking about taking breaks, which is, I think, really tough. It's such a tough part of being a creative person. I think I'm hugely like, I feel like I'm stuck in this like hustler mindset all the time where I need to be doing something all the time. But luckily, actually, earlier this year, I was made redundant from my job, which is like absolutely very sad and not great. But the best part of that was having the space to take a big break. And I was obviously really privileged and like really grateful that I was able to do that. But that time that I took to reflect on what happened in that redundancy, what do I value, what is my like creative journey looking like, all of that was so helpful for me, and like it really helped me grow as a creative person. But also I think that is like we're talking about like taking a larger break. Also recognizing when you need to take smaller breaks is also really helpful too. And that is really different for everybody. So if you're starting to feel a little checked out, or if you're like starting to feel maybe some symptoms of burnout or something, definitely recognize that that's probably a signal that you need to give yourself a little break. And that might look like a week, might look like just a day. It's totally different for everyone. But if you're able to have that self-awareness to be like, oh, I'm feeling not good about this, definitely communicate that it's time for a little break. And there's no shame in taking a break. But it's hard to feel that way, I think. And I totally understand that. But also, in general, if you are needing a larger break, because there's been a really difficult time, going through redundancy, there's been layoffs, I don't know, whatever you're going through, recognizing that your recovery is a non-linear process. So making sure that you acknowledge that that takes a lot of time. Everyone's recovery is very different. And making sure you give yourself that space and that time to really acknowledge how you're feeling and how you're doing is so important for you to get back to making games and feeling safe again in doing that. And then lastly, I'm talking a little bit about like experiencing burnout and listening to your body. Definitely, if you are feeling any of these symptoms, like feeling a bit numb, I definitely see when I feel very checked out, that is burnout time and I need to stop. But generally feeling quite numb, or a lot of, I'd say like excessive tiredness, especially withdrawing from friends, isolating yourself at home a lot, also just getting physically sick for a really long time, that's a good sign that you're probably experiencing burnout, and it is absolutely time to take a huge break and be very good to yourself and treat yourself to something really good. But yeah, ultimately, it's all about listening to your body and getting to know what are your symptoms, what do you need. Okay, we are now into the more practical area of aiming for realistic goals. So this is a discussion about how you can plan for uncertainty, which is going to happen. So making sure that you're ready for when things probably are going to go a little awry is super helpful in making realistic goals. So we're going to first talk a bit about scoping. So for me, a good plan for scoping is to make sure you are very early on considering a few different versions of your game project, just in case circumstances change. And not saying that they will, but just making sure that they're there in case that changes. And you can absolutely choose and pick which aspects of those versions of the game you want. But having those plans laid very early on is super, super helpful. So an example of that might be having the highest scope game, which is like all of the like frills, all of the good stuff is in there, every feature, like all of the quality of life stuff is all in the high scope game. The medium scope might be like, we're cutting down on the HD textures. We are cutting down on some of this high definition stuff. It's not working out. It's just too much. So the medium scope might be like cutting out some of the frills. And then the low scope would be just the smallest version of the game that you can achieve. And all of these things can be changed at will when you need them, but I always highly recommend just starting with the smallest version of the game first and then scoping up when you need it. I always believe that making sure that the game isn't overwhelming to start with is really helpful in making sure people are feeling motivated and productive. But it's also just great to test if the game even works in the first place. It always really sucks if you're like, oh, I have this high scope idea and it's like all of these amazing things happening. But once you come to test it, it doesn't work. So it's always great to keep the scope small at first and then grow as things get more fleshed out. But the scope exercise is also great in general, just to identify what you can cut and cut it when you need it. So yeah, like for example, if I was like, oh, I want this feature that is just going to absolutely improve the quality of life of players, but it literally like adds nothing else, like it's just a little quality of life change. That would be, I would say that's definitely on the chopping block if that is a lot of effort to add on to something that is already not working. So if the programmers are struggling to implement gameplay stuff, if the game design is stuck on something, that quality of life is not going to not be any help to the process. So that is cut. It's gone. And the last thing I wanted to note for scoping as well is just to acknowledge that you cannot foresee and know everything. And as a producer, I think I get into this like syndrome of feeling a little bad if I'm not able to kind of foresee these problems along the way. And I'm sure most kind of seasoned producers are able to see those things. But if you're growing within this space and if you're like, you know, being a producer, it's absolutely okay to not know everything. It just comes with experience and kind of recognizing telltale signs of things going wrong. But it's not always easy to see those things. So it's always good to be kind to yourself and just take that little grace to say like, I don't know everything and that's fine. All right, next up. How do you make kind of achievable objectives? One of my top tips is to make sure you are super generous with your time. So if you're working in indie games in particular and you have no kind of stakeholders, nobody is overseeing you, I definitely would be as generous with your time as you can, especially also if you're working part-time stuff on the side, doing full-time things as well. Be very kind with your time and make sure you have space for yourself to rest as well as making your game. So being generous with your time might be saying like, okay, if this feature is going to take 3 months, I'm going to just add a buffer time of an additional month on there just in case you need it. But if that's complete within 3 months, fantastic. That's great. Next up is a little interesting because it's good to assess somebody's interest in an objective. So I found that sometimes if something is taking a really, really long time, it may just be because someone's actually not that interested in doing it. And that's completely okay. It's definitely good to acknowledge that first, but recognize that there's probably a different way to do this then if the person is not interested in actually doing this objective. So figuring out a new plan to get that objective complete can be super, super helpful. And then next would be just to, in general, making large kind of unattainable or like unvisualizable goals into small achievable goals is super, super helpful. And you can go as granular as you want, but don't go so granular that is overwhelming. So that really depends on the team. So for just a little example would be, I have always wanted to open up a little online shop. And in general, when I think about that, it's very overwhelming. But if I break it down into brainstorming the logo, brainstorming the name of the shop, sketching some products and researching the platform, I think that already helps me think of like these achievable steps that I can do to make this online shop happen. So yeah, that is objectives. Next up is negotiating deadlines. This is especially difficult if you have, I don't know, people overseeing your project. If there are stakeholders involved, if you've got a publisher overseeing you, it can be super hard to negotiate this. But if you are still in a space where the stakes are pretty low, I think negotiating your deadlines is a skill and it should absolutely be utilized. So firstly, recognizing soft and hard deadlines. So as I said earlier, maybe a soft deadline would be completing these features in 3 months. And then the hard deadline is that additional month. And then holding people to that. So if you check in those 3 months and it's like, it's not happening, we may need to move the deadline. Great, we have identified that this feature is going to take a bit longer. So let's just extend that deadline out, maybe a couple more months, maybe a few more months. It's good to chat to your teammates about that, as they are the people who are like most informed about their department. So yeah, that moves on to assessing deadlines frequently. So once you hit that soft deadline, that might even be a little bit too late actually. If it's possible to set up a little check-in before then, definitely halfway through, it is great to check in on how this work is feeling. Is it feeling overwhelming? Is the deadline looming? Is it causing anxiety? And then if it is, if it's causing a lot of trouble for your teammates, absolutely move that deadline. Definitely negotiate that deadline to be further into the future. Assess like the length of the project, if there is space for that, and just make sure that ultimately we're all out here trying to have fun making games. So there should be as little anxiety as possible, really. So moving those deadlines and moving them freely around, I think, is really, really helpful. And then lastly is a little quote that I heard from a mentor when I was working with my other team called Team Gramps. This mentor said to us, "Nothing is ever truly urgent." And at the time I was like, what does this mean? But I realize now, as I have kind of grown more in game development, is realizing that you need to identify what urgency is. So what does urgency mean? Does it mean that you need to complete this literally right now? Or can it be done tomorrow? What is an urgent task? And kind of differentiating that between urgent and important. So an important task is like, I absolutely need to do this, but it doesn't need to be done right now. And then making sure you take a bit of stock about your own feelings about when you're feeling that like sense of urgency. What is causing that? Is it more about like somebody's message or the way that they've communicated something, or is it about the looming deadline? What is creating this feeling of urgency? And then last thing to have a little think about would be, what happens if you just don't do anything? Is it okay to just not do the task? Does it need to be done? It's always good to have a think about that, because I think when your task list is building and it's just so long, everything is urgent, it's always good to have a think about, if I didn't do this right now, what would happen? And usually the answer is like nothing. Hopefully the answer is nothing will happen. So we're going to go into a little general recap about what game dev with empathy is all about. So firstly, setting expectations, making sure that your teammates are all aligned on what this project is looking like. So asking the questions of, is this project paid or unpaid? What benefits come with it if it is unpaid? When will you be paid? Why do you want to work on the project? How many hours are you dedicating to it? How long is the project? All of these questions would be great to get answered right at the very beginning of the project and expect them to change. And it's okay for them to change. So additionally, it's also great to know if a teammate might want to leave the project. So their kind of availability for a certain amount of time also is really, really helppful. And then next up is making sure that you plan for uncertainty, because almost certainly nothing uncertainty is going to happen. So making sure you're ready for things to just go a little wrong. And it's not a problem for things to go wrong. You've planned for it, so it's all good. So that can look like scoping flexibly, making sure you move around your deadlines freely and negotiating them. And as we said earlier, just that nothing is ever truly urgent. And my next point, about 70% of the time, it works every time, which is a quote from Anchorman, which for some reason I felt fit really well with my general kind of rule that not everybody is operating at 100% all of the time. And that is completely okay. I think I arrive to work at 70% every day. So not bringing that expectation on yourself, but also not bringing that expectation to your teammates is really, really helpful, just to alleviate that pressure of like, you need to be operating at 100%. Oh, I don't think anybody can do that all the time. So just in general, being kind to yourself, being kind to your teammates is super, super helpful. I also put in a little recommendation here for Safe in Our World's traffic light system, which is a great way of kind of talking about how you're feeling when you arrive at work or when you're just hopping into game development. It's just a lovely system where you say like, oh, I'm feeling amber today. I may need some help and assistance with my work, but that's how I'm feeling today. So that was just like a really rough breakdown of it. But it's a great way to talk about how you're feeling without going into specifics if you don't want to. And the last point that I haven't brought up so much is to make small games. Make little games that make you happy. And this attributes to finding exactly how you like to work and who you like to work with and what games you like to work on. My preference of this is by signing up for a lot of game jams. So if you can figure out the kinds of people that you like working with, the working styles, what kind of games you like, all of these things can really help you achieve your full potential and be the creative you are meant to be, you know. But it's also just a fantastic chance to fail hard and fail fast, so you can learn all of these things while making a game. So on to the next slide about protecting your pixel heart. So the reason I came up with this pixel hearts visualization was I was thinking of like actually kind of how like emotionally like fragile we all are, and that's okay. And acknowledging that like things can hurt us as we work in creative spaces, things can be really difficult and they can cause us a lot of emotional reactions. It's completely okay to have those things happen. So that was what protecting your pixel heart was all about. So acknowledging that things are going to go wrong and it's okay for it to go wrong. And it happens to everybody. Being really extra kind to yourself when mistakes are made. A mistake has already been made, so there's no reason to be so hard on yourself. That's all about protecting your pixel heart. But in general, I think us game developers are so hard on ourselves. Like, the games that we make are so important. They are amazing creative work, but those games like can't be made if we are not feeling well. So absolutely prioritize your well-being, your feelings, your life, your stability, all of these things, so you can make the best game that you can. And I always think about that because I think the people who make the games are the most important. And lastly, there's a chance for your goals to not be achieved for a project. And that's a reality that we have to face sometimes. So sometimes you have to reconcile with those goals. Like, oh, the goals weren't achieved for a project. So what did you achieve though? What other things were learned from this? Did you pick up some new techniques? Did you find some amazing new teammates that you actually would love to work with? Just maybe not on that specific game. But is this a project that you could also revisit at a later date? Maybe it's not completely lost. Maybe it is salvageable. There's a lot of things that you can still do with a project. So I absolutely would just bring these questions out. So I'm going to stand on my soapbox a little now and talk about some of these affirmations that I sometimes struggle with remembering. But in general, it's just great to repeat these like to yourself or just say them out loud if you want. But in general, just like remember who you are. You're a very amazing game developer. You're a very amazing creative, but also you're multifaceted and nuanced. So you're so much more than your profession and your career. Like for example, me, I love my Ring Fit adventure. I love doing making lunch and taking like a huge break out of my day just to make a delicious lunch. All these things make you who you are. So yeah, a good reminder just to say you are more than your profession, making sure that you are giving yourself a lot of value. You are more than enough. All of the work that you are doing for a game is more than enough. You are bringing value to it. You are adding so much to it. There is so much you are bringing to the game that you are making. Acknowledging that you are not your mistakes. Being super kind to yourself when mistakes are made. They don't define you. They are a part of your journey, and they cause a lot of learning. A lot of learning to happen. So acknowledging that your mistakes are not you, and there is so much more to you than those things. And the last thing is about you deserve to be happy. And I think that's like very oversaid, absolutely. But I think it's easy to forget when we're lost in the throes of making a game that ultimately this is supposed to be like a fun thing to be doing. Making a game is supposed to be a good time, and sometimes you can get a bit lost in the source and you might forget that. But if it's not feeling fun anymore, maybe it's good to assess that and look at why is it not feeling so good anymore. So yeah, there's some affirmations to take away. But lastly, the very last thing is to make sure you go out and game dev. I'm going to stand on my soapbox again and just like let everybody know that we are out here making amazing things. So whenever I see like Wholesome Games Direct, whenever I see the little indie showcases pop up, all of the games that we are making are so amazing. And even if it is not seen by like a million people, your little experimental game that you just put out on itch, it has brought somebody value. If it has not brought someone value, it has brought so much value to yourself. And that is a lot. That is amazing. So acknowledging, I love to acknowledge anyway, that we are out here and making amazing things. I would love to see more experimental games. I worked on this fantastic anthology of games called the Cartomancy Anthology, which was a bunch of tarot cards like just thrown in together, like tarot cards that were, games that were based on tarot cards, and they were all thrown into an anthology. And that was such a great time. It was great to see all these like games that were made of so much indie heart. It was fantastic. And some of them were like very loose games, but they were all such great experiences. And I'm so glad that I got to be part of that. Embracing the experimental is so important for your creative soul, and just in general, inspiring you to be the best creative you can be. My third point is to treasure the jank. It's tough to, I think, remember that people make games. And whenever I see a little bit of clipping happen, whenever I see someone fall through the map, I'm like, well, you know what? A person made this, and that's completely fine. And I love it. I think it's great to see the things go wrong in games. People embrace it with speedrunning. There's so much joy I find in when a game goes a little awry and there's just a little bit of jank. That's okay, because we're people and we make mistakes and things cannot be perfect. And recognizing that there's going to be a little bit of jank in every game is completely okay. And then lastly, make sure you go out and make those mistakes and be shameless about it. Make a mistake, and be happy about it. It's hard. I get it. No, I totally understand. But when you go out and make those mistakes, so much learning happens, so much development happens for your creative journey. I absolutely believe that mistakes are good things to happen to you. There we go. We're going to wrap up my talk. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. You can find myself at franjupang@gmail.com if you want to drop me any questions or you just want to keep in touch or anything. All of my socials are on here as well. I'm a Shark T on Twitter and X, a Franjupang on Blue Sky, and on Instagram as well. Some of the teams that I've been a part of include Team Gramps, Chirashi Games, and also Queen's Guard, where I'm a producer, animator, and artist. Not all at the same time for all of them. But yeah, these are some of the projects I've been working on. Please feel free to check them out. I really hope you enjoyed that talk, and I hope to hear some of your questions. And please let me know if you have any questions.
I think this talk was awesome. Thank you so much. That was good.
Thank you, Indy.
I love what is it? Enjoy the jank? Is that what it is? Embrace the jank.
Embrace the jank.
look at Goat Simulator, right? Like that was just a big janky mess.
Yeah.
And more people should make games purposely that have janks and clipping and just to purposely do it.
Absolutely.
Purposely do it. I think that would be great. We do got some really good questions. We have some really good questions. So this is from Rebel Yubnub on YouTube. Mm-hmm. When you cut the scope to start smaller, does that mean you're not doing full prototyping?
Oh, that's a very good question. I'll have a little think about that. So when you
I'm sure everyone does stuff different, right? But
totally. I think when you first cut your scope to start smaller, it doesn't mean that you're not doing full prototyping. I think full prototyping is still a part of making any game. So you should absolutely still prototype your game to the fullest extent that you can, but just the overall completeness of the game is in general smaller. So I hope that kind of answers your question, but it's a really good way of defining the two, definitely. But yeah, I think that would be my answer to that.
And if you just love prototyping, then prototype away, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If you want to, really refine the gameplay, keep prototyping to your heart's content.
Yeah, just keep doing it. And drop your questions in the chat. We've only got a few minutes left with her. We've got 10 minutes left with her.
Mm-hmm.
So drop your questions in the chat right now. We don't have questions right now, but we've got really great comments for you. I love your positive vibes. Thank you for making it less of a talk and more of an informational hang.
Oh,
awesome.
I'm so glad, Sammy. I was a little worried that this wasn't a very formal talk, actually. So I'm really glad to hear that tone was helpful.
No, it's very great, and you are super positive, and that just makes it even more interesting. Another one from Starista Jacobson. Thank you so much. This was comforting. Wow, your talk was comforting. It was an informational hang.
I'm so glad. Yeah.
You can put that on your next talk. Informational hang.
Informational hang.
Right?
Yeah, definitely.
Positive vibes. Okay, so let's talk about let's talk about burnout. Burnout. I back in 2010.
Yeah.
I had designed a mobile game, and I wasn't a programmer. I did it in a program, and this is called Stencil, which is like drag and drop stuff. So I hired a programmer, and then we were working on it, and then that didn't pan out. And then I went through 3 programmers. It took me a year to make this game, and I was at the point where I was done. The game was released. I didn't care if it got updated. I did not care about it at all. I said I will never ever work directly on a game ever again. Which I found out that that's not true, but I was burnt on it. I was mad. I was burnt. So what are some good tips for avoiding that kind of experience?
Totally. I totally think first recognizing your signs of burnout is really important. So for you, like you said, you were starting to get maybe a little irritable and frustrated. I think understanding that these are my symptoms of burnout, and when I get to that kind of point, that's not me, but I am at a point where I am starting to not feel well about the project. My mental health is taking a huge dip and dive because of it. knowing that that is your like kind of point point of burnout is really important.
Mhm.
And then if you're able to, then take a break. If you can, communicate that this isn't working out for me, and this like some kind of what is causing the burnout. Maybe it could be like the arrangement, like somebody you're working with you're not agreeing with. It could be good to identify that, but if you're not able to, definitely just take a little step back and just see what is actually happening and causing this burnout, because it like different reasons will cause burnout for everybody.
Oh, big
So,
time. Well,
yeah.
yeah, for me, now I have experience in burning out because I was a content creator full time for a while, and I got burnt out on that big time.
Yeah,
And it took me years to be able to like, okay, I want to stream some more, and I couldn't do it full time like that. But like I have experience with burnout making content, burnout making games. So I don't learn that way. Don't learn that way. That's all I can say. It's like pay attention to your body, pay attention to your life, your relationships with the people around you.
Totally.
All of the whatever like you were talking about have to have positive devotions. You know what I mean? Whether that's meditating or whatever, that stuff is so good. So
yeah, positive affirmations.
Yeah, positive affirmations, devotional, whatever. From Tohu on YouTube, are there any good ways to hold a retrospective? Like, are there any formats that there could be used for? Also, love the positive vibes.
I'm so glad. Totally. So my kind of retrospective of choice would be to use a Miro board. So there's like this like what you call it, like a software or application called Miro. Anywhere that you can kind of lay down some sticky notes, encourage people to share their thoughts is super, super helpful. So yeah, if you're doing it remotely, a Miro board is really helpful for that. But maybe if you're doing it in person, maybe just a blackboard or like just a blank wall where you can literally stick sticky notes down, that would be great. But yeah, some of the kind of exercises I encourage would be definitely check out the sailboat exercise. That's one of my favorites because it's so visual. That talks about like what is the iceberg that you foresee in your future. So that's like, oh, what troubles do you think will come your way? What is your anchor? What is weighing you down right now? Like, what is the wind in your sails? Who is captaining the ship? These kinds of things. That. It's super, super nice. But yeah, there's like loads of similar exercises like that. You can definitely look up and see which one fits your team and what you're looking for.
This question is good too. I have an answer a little bit for this as well.
Totally, yeah.
Is it possible if you're really limited on time that prototyping can add too much time to your project? Are there projects that are made without prototyping? I would say there are projects that are made without prototyping, but also I would say if you don't know your game is fun, then you spend all the energy to make it, and then you realize it's not fun. That is a bunch of time wasted. As opposed to if you just prototype can be something like if you're doing it in 3D, it could just be blocks.
Yeah,
it could just be squares. It can, and you just prototype how it works and the mechanics. Because if you make a mechanic and this just is not fun, you've wasted all that time. But that's my thoughts on it.
Totally. I completely agree with that. I think prototyping will look really different for every game. So making sure that you're prototyping and testing the right thing is like the most important thing if you're limited on time. So what is the biggest unknown about your game, and making sure that like you test that first in the easiest way possible. So that might be going into a 3D space, opening up Maya or whatever, even if you need to, using whatever tools you have to make sure you can test, is this viable? Is this doable? Is it fun? All of these things, like even using paper prototypes. I've recently gone into board game like prototypes, and I think they are so helpful for getting like that tactile feel down, and they're super quick to make as well. So yeah, it's definitely possible that you can prototype too much, but that might be a case that that usually boils down to maybe you're not prototyping the right thing or you're not testing the right thing. So yeah, I don't think though that there are many projects made without prototyping, because testing is such a huge part of game development.
Well, I know a company that was they were doing a map, and I was like, you need to just prototype everything out to make sure that it plays good. But instead they spent weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks making this map, and then when they played it, It was not fun. It wasn't good. It didn't do what they wanted it to do. And I was like,
Oh
all you had to do
no.
is make a little thing with cubes, right? You
Oh,
can bust out a prototype really quick, right?
absolutely,
And that
absolutely.
also helps you with your skills, depending on what the kind of game is. I mean, I have my notebook where I write
Mhm.
stuff down and draw stuff out and what my thoughts are and everything. So if you
Absolutely.
don't want to prototype, at least write stuff out. Try and think stuff out.
Yeah, like a
Here,
flow chart or like tabletop simulator. I've seen people prototyping it. There's like so many things you could do to make prototyping easier on yourself.
I mean, and if it's like you can use UEFN or Fortnite to prototype ideas, even if you're not going to make it in, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
UEFN is such an amazing tool. Here's a
Mhm.
great comment. A couple of great comments for you from Max Winter. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience. Double thumbs up. Thank you. Awesome talk. Love the vibes as well.
Oh,
That's
thank
not,
you all so
that's
much.
awesome.
So
Yeah,
kind.
thank you so much for coming on here. Did you want to do another well, you did your shout out. If you were to tell people one place to come follow you or to connect with you, where would that be?
I would say if you're looking for informal stuff, then definitely find me on Blue Sky. If you're looking for me, I'm on LinkedIn as well. If you want to connect with me more formally as like a business thing, yeah, Charlotte Pang on LinkedIn. I should be like top result there. So yeah, please come and get in touch with me if you want to ask more questions. I don't know, find out more about what I'm doing, or if you have any questions about this talk, game development with empathy in general, please let me know.
And the game from Tarachi is free to play, right? It's free download.
Absolutely, yes. Tarashi Games has a free game called Life After Magic. If you are wanting to experience life as a magical girl, then please check out Life After Magic.
You forgot the part where you told me, you said, I don't know if that's your thing or not, to be a magical girl. It could be.
I don't know, Indu. I just don't want to. I don't want to presume.
It could be.
Maybe.
I'm a magical. You just never know.
But yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Next, we've got our last talk. It's Carlos Alberto Suarez Romero, Leadership and Communication for Indie Devs, Building Impactful Teams and Vision. And you'll also get to see Jay, so get a good glimpse of Jay. Thanks so much, Charlotte, for coming on.
Thank you,
appreciate
Indy.
you so much.
Thank you, everybody. See you.